Hello, everybody. I'm Mike Slicker at Lighthouse Books in Dade City, Florida. And this is another one of our Rare Book Moments. Our Rare Book Moments are on YouTube. It's a channel. They're intended to do just the basics of book collecting. Over time, we've talked about a little bit about how to evaluate books, and how to assemble a collection, and what a mature collection looks like. We've talked about bindings, what they're made of, and some little bit about the design. We've talked about printing. We've talked about color processes, illustrations, all of those sorts of things that have to do with books. We've talked a little bit about ephemera as well. Ephemera being ephemeral items, things that were printed that were not really intended to last forever, like World Series tickets or circus posters, those kinds of things. Today, we're talking about something that's sort of betwixt and between. We're going to talk about newspapers. Newspapers are sometimes thought of as fish wrap, things that are not intended to last forever. On the other hand, any historian knows that that's how you get the word of the people at the time. And certainly the printers along the line intended for their works to last longer than a week or two. So we're going to talk a little bit about newspapers today. We just have a couple of examples. The interesting thing about the newspapers is that they're relatively inexpensive when you go into a bookstore. Sometimes, because they're in the back room or what have you, you have to ask about them. And you may have an interest in this or that or what have you, but you might say, well, I'm interested in such and such. Do you have any newspapers along that line? And indeed, you might be surprised at the kind of historic perspective that you can get on whatever subject you want. I bought this newspaper a while back. It's the Republican from Sinning, New York. You'll notice that the headline says that it's from Sing Sing, New York. And indeed, when I bought these, it's dated January 1st, 1863. I thought, well, all the printers were off fighting the war, and so they were using prisoners to print the newspaper or something like that. What I didn't know, being a Southern boy, that Sing Sing did become, or was even at this time, the place of the prison, the corrections place. And because over time it became associated with the town's name, the town changed its name. And so in 1901, Sing Sing, New York became a Sing Sing, and so on. So what was going on January 1st, 1863? Old newspapers are interesting. You'll see they're on pretty good paper. It was a rag paper, which is always good, and it holds up pretty well. They were generally published weekly. So each 4 pages here is a week. Generally, the printer set up the outside pages, shall we say, with ads and things that would last over the week. So this printer has some stories on the front page and ads on the back page, but where the real news was always on the inside. It was not where where we have come to expect it to be. And in this case, they do have mention of the Civil War that was raging on. In fact, as this publisher says, the past year has been one of vicissitude and trial. The effects of the Civil War now raging. There are no flattering prospects opening in the future, and blah, blah, blah. You get a feel for where the Union was thinking at that particular time, January 1st, 1863. And then in this little block here, second column down toward the center, is a little notice that the President's proclamation. Today, we have every reason to believe the President of the United States will issue his proclamation of freedom to all slaves of traders numbering more than 3 million souls. This will be the most sublime act of any government done under the sun. It will commence a new era, a new mighty one in this republic. Henceforth, the ruling principle of this nation will be the union and freedom, one and inseparable. And that's how he introduced. Of course, they didn't have, since the proclamation was issued on January 1st, 1863, they didn't have the text. But in anticipation of that, we get a feel for how people were thinking in Sing Sing, New York. We can see how newspapers have evolved a little bit. This is about 50 years later, 1917. And this volume represents 1 week of a Boston newspaper. The newspaper is entitled The Boston American. Now, for a little perspective, we have to remember that in Boston at the time were a lot of recent Irish immigrants. And in Ireland, the feeling was that the enemy of my enemy might be my friend. So we begin with some of the editorial things, wanting America to remain neutral. So on February 22nd, 1917, which happens to be Washington's birthday, in the front of the newspaper, above the fold, it reads a quotation from George Washington that says, the great rule of conduct for us is to have with Europe as little connection as possible. So far as we have already formed engagement, let them be fulfilled with perfect good faith. Here, let us stop. So obviously, this Boston newspaper, with its strong Irish readership, is wanting the United States in World War I to remain neutral. And so let me show you the next week of this newspaper. This is again the Boston American. And this is another week of it. You can see the paper has changed. We're now using a wood pulp paper. So paper is less expensive and easier to come by. Some of the photographic processes have developed, and so illustrations are easier. The following week, the Zimmermann letter was discovered. The Zimmermann letter was from a German ambassador to the Mexican ambassador. You can see the headline now is Report German Plot Against U.S. Sought Jap and Mexican help. The Zimmermann letter proposed that we, Germany and Mexico, shall make war together and together make peace. We shall give general financial support, and it is understood that Mexico is to reconquer the lost territory in New Mexico, Texas, and Arizona. The details are left to you for settlement. You are instructed to inform the President of Mexico of the above in the greatest confidence as soon as it is certain that there will be an outbreak of war with the United States, and on and on. So within a week, the Zimmermann letter has been discovered, and as we read the editorial comments remaining in the week, we find that all of a sudden, the people in Boston are very much in favor of going to war with Germany. And it was not long after, this is the week of March 1st, 1917, it was not long afterwards that the doughboys, the United States Army, began shipping soldiers into France and into World War I. But again, you see how the newspapers are able to give us a flavor of the time, let us see how history is unfolding. And again, if you have the opportunity in your collecting interests, ask about the newspapers, perhaps the newspapers in the back room. We'll look forward to seeing you again.